You can see from your agenda a little bit how we're going to work this morning. Dan's going to kick us off with a little bit of an overview of the open source ecosystem, and then we're going to go into presentations from the various folks that you see on the screen here. After the coffee break, we do want to make it interactive, so we're looking forward to hearing from you, questions that you have, ideas that you may want to share, use cases from real life. And the room is not configured very friendly to that, but we'll do the best. We'll do the best that we can. You'll see at the top of the agenda, hopefully you have it, there's a little bit.ly link for a Google Doc if we can take communal notes. So anything that you'd like to add onto that document would be appreciated. And for those of you who don't yet have your wireless set up, it's ARES 2018, but with a small a this year, not with a large A. Great. I'm going to introduce folks here at the beginning, and I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. So we've got Juan Alperin in the center. They're not seated in any particular order. Juan is assistant professor in the publishing program at Simon Fraser University, where he teaches about the role of technology in publishing and society. He's also associate director of research for the Public Knowledge Project, PKP, where he's worked on open source solutions for scholarly publishing for more than 10 years. Next up, we have John Chodacki. You want to raise your hand, John? There we go. Oh, I'm hearing from the other end. John is director of the University of California Curation Center at the California Digital Library, where he works across the UC campuses and the broader community to ensure that the CDL's digital curation services meet the emerging needs of the scholarly community, including digital preservation, data management, and reuse. He also represents CDL in the global research community and defines and prioritizes new and improved services. Next up is Nathan Liskow. Nathan is a senior Drupal developer for eLife, a nonprofit that aims to help scientists accelerate discovery by operating a platform for research communication that encourages and recognizes the most responsible behaviors in science. He joined eLife's technology team in November 2013. Next up is Dan Morgan. We have two Dans today, so you may have to specify in your questions. Dan Morgan is publisher at the University of California Press with responsibility for the press's non-traditional journals program, which includes the value-sharing OA journals, Collabra, Psychology, and Elementa, Science of the Anthropocene, plus case studies in the environment and more. He joined UC Press in 2014 to focus on mission-driven, not-for-profit digital initiatives. Next up is Kristen Rattan. Kristen is the co-founder and executive director of the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation, COCO, a nonprofit with a mission to involve how knowledge is created, produced, and shared. Kristen has a 20-year history working to accelerate advances in science and research communication, most recently as publisher at PLOS. And then last but certainly not least, as he's my boss, Dan Whaley, who is the CEO and founder of Hypothesis. Dan is a coder and entrepreneur who created the first online travel reservation company on the web, ITN Get There, in 1995. He wrote much of the software, launched the business, and guided the long-term technical and product vision. Get There went public in 1999 and was sold to Sabre in 2000. He currently serves as director of Sauce Labs, the leading open-source functional testing company, and Get Around, a peer-to-peer car-sharing company. He's a Shuttleworth Fellow. And with that, I will hand over to Dan.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Great to see so many familiar faces here. Let's see, where's the big button here? I'm super excited to be here with my open source peers and compatriots. And I think we decided to open this today with a little bit of a kind of an overview of the open source ecosystem, but even more fundamentally, kind of why we decide to make open source software and create organizations to do that. First, just the open source bazaar title for this gathering is a nod, some people may know or may not know, to a book written by one of the Linux kernel developers, one of the primary people responsible for writing the Linux operating system, named Eric Raymond, who was kind of wondered why Linux, which was written by thousands of people in a kind of a very open, collaborative way, was able to succeed against other operating systems like Microsoft and so forth, and now dominates essentially all servers and the top 500 supercomputers and so forth. And how that worked. And he kind of came up with this concept called the cathedral and the bazaar. The cathedral being the walled garden of proprietary software development as it takes place in many, and still takes place in many cases. And then the bazaar being the kind of freewheeling, collaborative environment that a lot of open source projects take place in, particularly larger ones. And really came to the conclusion that that there were these hidden kind of attributes of the collaborative nature of open source software that gave it really fundamental and powerful strength. Of course, that open source software created some enemies. Famously, Steve Ballmer, who called it a cancer. Of course, last year in an interview, he says he loves it. So a little bit of revisionist thinking there. But we still have a lot of these attitudes about open source software even today, and even in the scholarly ecosystem. So one article, it's in the Atlantic, and people who are interested might Google the scientific paper is obsolete. Fantastic article came out last month. Really goes into one example of why open source software, and kind of in a real world example, is such a powerful thing. And it compares essentially the rise of Mathematica, which is now a 30-year-old software program. Many of you may know, started by Stephen Wolfram, and which just revolutionized the computational mathematics, and compares that to the Jupyter project, which is a group of open source software developers led by Fernando Perez out of Berkeley, and kind of points out that in just 3 to 4 years, here's the Google Trends chart, that essentially Jupyter has eclipsed, if you look at this as meaningful data, has eclipsed the popularity of Mathematica as a project, because of the power of the open source paradigm, where the Jupyter project is completely open, the software is completely open. Contributors have come and contributed support for nearly 100 programming languages. It used to be called IPython Notebook, and now it changed its term to Jupyter, which stands for Julia, Python, and R, but now supports nearly every major programming language. And the notion of this kind of collaborative ability is just an extremely powerful phenomenon. Let's see here. Get our slides to advance. When we started Hypothesis, one of the things that became really obvious is that a whole bunch of people had tried to do this annotation thing. In other words, to create a collaborative layer over the web where anybody could essentially annotate any web page, and we could have layers of information and collaborative thinking over the knowledge on the web. And in fact, we put a spreadsheet together of the projects that had essentially tried to do this over the last 25 years since the very first example was created by Mark Andreessen as part of the NCSA Mosaic project. And what became obvious after studying these projects, which we did early on, which was that all of them were closed source proprietary systems that were not meant to be interoperable, but essentially were meant to be kind of monolithic projects where everybody would end up having to use this proprietary system, probably run on a centralized set of servers in order to get this this annotated web, which was everybody's goal. And so we, in studying these projects, put together a set of principles that we organized hypothesis around in 2011, and the very first one was free and open. It was just obvious to us that we would never solve this problem by trying to hold it captive and to essentially exclude the ability of other people to build on top of it. So, so fast forwarding to last year, I was talking to a senior staff person at Wiley who was exploring the potential of open source projects to support some of the problems that they were facing. And he asked me a really simple question, which was, don't you guys ever talk to each other? Because he had been going around talking to some of the different open source projects out there. But whereas with some more proprietary, larger scale systems that are maybe fully integrated, there's a kind of one person, one product manager to go talk to. With these open source projects, they were great, but they were kind of chaotic. And this kind of inspired some of us here in this room to come together and form a coalition called the Joint Roadmap for Open Science Tools to essentially to address this problem. So essentially the mandate of this is that the major open source projects that are out there haven't really made a unified effort to come together and do kind of joint road mapping, joint brainstorming to create and explore user stories about how the researcher of the future can have a powerful, comprehensive experience and kind of step outside of our little cloistered projects and kind of imagine that together. So some of those user stories might look, and this is comes from a list of user stories that Hypothesis and a project called Meta brainstormed together last year. But questions like, who's tried to reproduce the results of this paper? What are the other articles like this article that's in my browser right now? Which papers cite this one? Where is it mentioned on the web? Is it contradicted anywhere? Has it been corrected? How can I understand this paper in the larger context of the literature? And other kinds of questions like, what are the key findings I should be aware of in new papers coming out based on what I read and tag and annotate? So a kind of a system that would keep track of what I'm interested in and notify me when new research findings came out. So all of these things are potential problems that we can solve if we take the combined capability of systems like Meta or Wikimedia, Wikidata, the Hypothesis annotation software or an open source annotation capability, if we think holistically from a user's perspective about how, first, about how to go about solving those. So this project is currently made up of these member organizations. We are very open to other open source nonprofit projects working on solving these kinds of problems that we want to join. We're going to be having a workshop this fall to come together and begin that process of really working and brainstorming in earnest. So if you're interested and know of projects that might be interested in this, please let us know. And this is essentially the set of goals for the effort. So that's it. Are we holding questions?
I think we can take a couple questions for each speaker and then sort of discussion.
Let's give him a hand.
Thanks.